I'm WW2, director of NESPE, and today we're back for the third episode of Crime and Fiction with Thomas Sprengers, in which we're going to talk about the history of crime fiction after the Second World War. So, hi Thomas.
Hello.
Welcome. In the last video we talked about crime and fiction history up to the Second World War. And in this episode we're going to talk about post-Second World War. Why did you make this difference?
After the Second World War, the genre becomes much more diverse. A lot of subgenres pop up and crossovers between subgenres. So before the Second World War, it's much more static, and after the Second World War, much more dynamic. And to highlight this diversity in different subgenres, I thought it was good to stop at the Second World War, because this enables me to talk a little bit about specific differences that occur after the Second World War.
And what were these differences?
Well, there's different ways of looking at the genre of crime fiction and to look at the different subgenres within it. But maybe better to start with talking about what influences there were to make the genre so diverse. Whereas before the Second World War you had very fixed genres. You had the classic detective with the whodunit, the locked room mystery, the quirky detectives and amateur investigators. After the Second World War you start to see more of society represented in the fiction. And the topics and storylines represent much more what is happening in society. You can talk about two types of revision, intraliterary and extraliterary revision. As a result of postmodernism, intraliterary revision in crime fiction means that the rules of the genre are put upside down. The revision here refers to the way in which the plotline, the protagonists, and society are represented in the book. The genre itself becomes much more flexible. Authors start to play with the fixed elements in the story. Protagonists can sometimes even be the criminals now. You start to see anti-detectives or protagonists that are far from ideal. And then there's the side of the extra-literary revision, and this is, I think, even more important. So you see how changes in society start to change crime fiction itself, either through the identity of the authors of crime fiction or the protagonists and the themes of the stories themselves.
So what type of important shifts happened in this time?
So you can think of a lot of different things here, but one of the first things that come to mind is the role of feminism. In the mid-60s, female authors become much more prolific and they sort of invent new genres. But what is maybe more important in this is that female protagonists become much more serious characters.
So if you're saying that there's a strong voice of feminism, that means that women are not just the victims anymore?
Women before that in crime fiction were often either sidekicks or femme fatales, but not very serious characters. And you can see from the 60s on that a whole army of very capable women detectives, police officers, forensic pathologists, doctors, etc. enter on the scene. In that same line, you could think, for example, as well of the emergence of LGBTQ characters and writers. Nowadays, this is a very important niche of crime fiction.
That has started more recently.
Yeah, that's more recently. I would say from the 90s on that this has emerged. There are specialized websites for literature written by LGBTQ authors or with a focus on LGBTQ themes in the book, or protagonists as part of the LGBTQ community. There's more ethnic diversity among the authors of crime fiction, but also among the characters and protagonists. Now you start to see serious protagonist roles being fulfilled by different ethnicities. Related to this is literature that takes place in smaller communities throughout the world. So for example, crime fiction that completely plays in the poor sections of New Orleans, or in South Africa. After apartheid, black authors really came into popularity. And readers can use this as a sort of armchair tourism. So apart from just enjoying a crime fiction story, they're also immersed into a different culture with different lingo, different power structures. And that adds to the story being interesting to the reader. So with this diversity in authors and protagonists also comes emancipation in the storyline. The psychology of the different characters in the books becomes much more important. It's not simply anymore who done it or how done it. It becomes why done it. The characters become more inside out, meaning that you get much more about the motivation of the protagonist, so much more of the psychology. Female authors nowadays seem to be much better at adapting to modernity as well, so talking about influences of social media in the lives of their characters, or they seem much more adept to talk about young people. So this is, I think, a noticeable difference between male and female authors. Another interesting genre is the historical crime fiction. So these are stories of crime in a specific historical setting. It can employ famous characters from history, but the central idea is that it gives a lesson in social history. For example, Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, which plays in medieval times, gives a really good insight into what was happening in that period of time.
It's funny because it's also a locked room mystery.
Yes, yeah.
Who done it, how done it, when done it.
So this is another incredibly popular genre. These books are generally really thick and very well researched, because the author has to contend with the fact that the readers probably know a lot about the time period as well.
Or don't know, but have to have that information fed in order to understand the story and to really immerse into the story.
It's maybe even more than the other subgenres in crime fiction really important that there's accuracy, historical accuracy. Another genre is the crime fiction with supernatural elements, and there is a big reader base, but it's basically crime fiction with some supernatural elements.
It somehow has a touch with the horror genre and...
Yeah, Mo Hyder, for example, has written a series of books that are a sort of crossover between crime fiction and horror. It's only that you don't know when you're reading the book if the paranormal element is real or just a fiction of the imagination of the protagonist. But the books are incredibly suspenseful, and I really recommend them. The rise of true crime is enormous. Before the Second World War, this was basically limited to journalism. Now it becomes a genre that normal people like you and I enjoy reading. And the last important difference is that after the Second World War, you see crime fiction start to emerge in different types of media. So where it was first in the area of newspapers, pulp fiction, and classic detective novels, you slowly start to see crime fiction entering much more into cinema, series, podcasts, video games. Crime fiction nowadays is everywhere. A different way to think about how you could classify crime fiction can also be through the identity of the protagonist. One way to look at it is to think of a group of procedurals as one classification. So within the procedural, almost any profession, almost any skill subset can be used as a subgenre. So where you used to have the hard-boiled crime fiction, we now move more to the police procedural, in which the reader follows a crime fighter from either the police, the FBI, and with him solving the mystery, solving the puzzle, you also get a sense of the culture that he works in, the bureaucracy, the monotony, the power struggles within the system that he's working. So all these elements add to the classic detective story from before. But you can also think, for example, of people from the legal profession, like in John Grisham's books, where the protagonist is often a lawyer or a judge. With, for example, the emergence of DNA analysis and technology in the mid-80s, you start to see forensic pathologists, like in Patricia Cornwell's books or Kathy Wright's books.
Kathy Wright was the one from Bones, right?
Yes.
From the series Bones that were based on her books.
Yeah. Using vocations is an expression of the positivism, the scientific determinism of our time. Equilibrium between good and evil can be restored by scientific method. The belief that science can provide a solution. Of course, certain professions lend themselves better than others for this. A very popular one is, for example, the newsroom fiction, in which journalists are either trying to solve a case or they are fighting against the suppression of a certain type of story. With increasing popularity of computers and increases in technology, artificial intelligence, you start to get computer forensics and computer sciences and people that work with computers that become protagonists. And for the rest, you have political themes, military themes, even writers that write in the theme of sports. So it's very diverse. In contrast to that, the protagonist doesn't have to be the crime solver. The protagonist can also be the criminal. Two examples of this are the subgenres of capers and heists.
What's the difference between capers and heists?
The major difference between capers and heists is that in capers the criminals are amateurs, and in heists they are professionals, like, for example, in the Ocean's 11 series. The reader finds himself rooting for the criminals. This makes those stories different. And the last classification that you could apply to the protagonist is when the protagonist is basically unrelated to crime. There's a very popular genre of cozies and domestic crime fiction, mostly written by women, in which the protagonist is a chef, or it's about the theme of knitting, and they sometimes have cats and dogs helping to solve the crime. So this is really for people who want to sit on the couch with a cup of tea and enjoy a nice, funny story.
No gruesome, no.
No, so those stories don't have sex, don't have adult language.
No blood.
No blood. There is generally a crime to be solved, but the focus is not on the gory details in these books.
You said that classification by the protagonist, according to the protagonist, was something, one way of classifying it, but would be another way of classifying them.
Another good way could be the type of question that the protagonist is trying to answer. So you could see before World War II, the whodunit and maybe the howdunit were very dominant. You can see after World War II a big influence of the whydunit. You want to know why the protagonist, why the criminal, what are their motivations. And linked to the procedurals, you can also see the how catchem, involving the reader in the method of catching the criminal.
Even if they already know who they are, they have to find him.
Yeah, so the classic definition of how catchem is that you are presented with the crime in the beginning, often even including the identity of the perpetrator, and then you follow the process of someone in the procedural trying to catch the criminal, and you follow the process of trying to catch them. So it shifts very much from before World War II, presentation of facts and then a resolution of the mystery, to a focus on the process of solving the case.
So that's it for today, guys. I hope you liked it. Don't forget to follow us and hope to see you for the next episode.
Bye.